Victoria. Okay. So welcome back, everyone. So we've had like a full day of debates already. We've heard really amazing arguments from really compelling speakers. It's all been very impressive, and we're really excited for the final round right now. And I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the event again and the two organizations and our partner with this event. So this debate is being organized by two organizations, Difficult Dialogues and TVE, Television for the Environment. Difficult Dialogues is an India-based organization that every year puts on a 3-day forum held in Goa about a topic of interest in South Asia. And they have discussions and debates, and they really think about policy issues around this issue and put out a published list of policy recommendations. So it's a really amazing event, and this year is the first year they're going global with it. They're partnering with TVE, which is based in London. TVE produces and develops films of environmental importance that get screened all across the world on networks, and their mission is to inspire change through environmental films. And this year they're partnering, and they're basically putting together this forum, which is around the theme of environmental sustainability. The Daring Debates program is part of Difficult Dialogues. It was introduced as a way to bring youth voices into the event, which, you know, youth voices are so important. It's really important that we engage these voices in the policy making right now, because they're going to be the leaders of the future. And so this event is all about really highlighting these youth voices, and we're really excited to have all the students participating here today. And we hope that this is a really enriching activity for them. And then our partner for this event is Ecologic, and we have the founder of that organization here. And so I was going to pass it on, if she's on right now, Rosina, to just talk a little bit about Ecologic. If she's
Sure, thanks, Surbi. Yep, hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosina, and as Surbi said, I'm the founder and executive director of Ecologic, which is a nonprofit organization. And we are committed to finding creative ways to talk about and educate people about the climate crisis. And this debate event is definitely a creative way to do that. And like Surbi said, it highlights youth voices, which is very exciting and so inspiring. And so I'm very happy to have been invited to partner on this event. And we want to find ways to bring people into the climate movement, because ultimately it affects all of us. So please visit ecologicprograms.org. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and stay tuned for an upcoming podcast that we have coming out that will be called Love in the Time of Climate Change, which is based off of a play that we produced. And so thank you all so much, and best of luck to the debaters in this final round. Thanks, Surbi.
Great, thank you so much. And I realized I also forgot to introduce myself. I'm Surbi Sarang. I'm an associate attorney at Earth Justice, and I've also just been helping organize with TVE and Difficult Dialogues this year to bring this event to the United States. And I'm very excited to be a part of this. And so I think it would be great right now if we could just quickly have our debaters who will be debating in the final round introduce themselves, and our judging panel just introduce themselves really quickly. And hopefully everyone watching has access to the judging bio, so you can read more about the judges there. but let's start with the students who will be debating. If you could just introduce yourself and your school and the side that you'll be debating.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Yu. I'm a junior at the George Washington University, and I will be debating affirmative.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rush Patel. I am a sophomore at the George Washington University, also debating on the affirmative.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aditya. I'm a senior at Harvard, and I'm debating on the negative.
And I'm Asher. I'm also a senior at Harvard, debating with Aditya on the negative.
Thank you. And if we could have the judges introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Martha Roberts. I currently serve as a senior advisor to Colorado U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, and previously was an attorney with Environmental Defense Fund and at the Environmental Protection Agency. Really thrilled to be here.
Hi, I'm Christina Bowman. I'm a senior manager at the University of Maryland Center for Global Sustainability, where I work on climate and energy policy, both domestically here in the US, assessing subnational climate action, and also internationally. I previously was at the Department of Energy working on clean energy for low-income communities. I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm an attorney with the group Earth Justice, and I litigate on behalf of environmental and public health.
Hi, everybody. I'm Giordano. I'm a paralegal at Harmon Linder Rogoski's pre-litigation side.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jacob Carter. I am a research scientist, and I work for the Center for Science and Democracy at the Unit Concerned Scientists, where I research and investigate scientific integrity issues within the federal government.
I think that was everyone. Did I miss anyone? All right, perfect. So just a reminder, the students will be debating on the topic that's subverting democratic processes to respond to the existential threat of the climate crisis is justified. And I'm going to pass it on to Saranhal, who's also been a facilitator and organizer of this event, to just briefly give an overview of, we're using public forum debate here, and just an overview of what this format looks like and what the rules are.
So, hello everyone. My name is Sorangel Liriano. I'm a litigation assistant at Earth Justice with the Sustainable Food and Farming team. I'm also a youth ambassador with the 2020 Global Sustainability Film Awards, so it's exciting to experience these debates today. We will be following the public forum debate style in this debate. So debaters will engage in speeches and crossfire questions to defend their positions, so that have been pre-assigned. Affirmative will agree with the resolution, and negative will make a case against it. The debate will last approximately 40 minutes and will be followed by judge deliberations, winner announcements, and a panel with judges and debaters. So as my colleague Serbi mentioned, today in our final round of the US chapter of Daring Debates, we will be considering the following resolution: subverting democratic processes to respond to the existential threat of the climate crisis is justified. And now my colleague Serbi Sarang will commence the debates.
Yeah, and then just a reminder that the winners of this debate will get to the opportunity to advance to the international finals that are happening in November. So it's really exciting, and good luck to everyone. And I think we can begin.
Great, thank you all so much. Now, before I begin my speech, I just want to reiterate how thankful I am to be here. As a woman of color and as a young person, I've always been told that young people's views don't matter. So it really means the world to me that y'all are listening to youth voices and that y'all care about what we have to say. So thank you so much. Great. Hills burning, ice caps dissolving, children dying. A cry for life is echoing across the world. As the conversations of systemic racism are at the forefront, it shows the realities of environmental racism. We believe that climate change is an existential threat. We believe that the instability caused by climate change will destroy far more than the undermining of a broken racist system. But before I go into that, I want to first discuss the framing of today's debate. Because the topic statement says that subverting democratic processes to respond to the existential threat of the climate crisis is justified, we can reasonably assume the ability of subversion. After all, per the topic statement, our role as the affirmative is to prove that subversion to combat climate change is justified. We use the Merriam-Webster definition of democracy, a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and furthermore representative of the people and the majority. Democratic processes are flawed and are the very reason why we are in this situation. With that, I want to discuss our three main topics for today: why the subversion of democracy is necessary to address the existential threat of climate change, why the status quo robs vulnerable populations and minorities from discussing the decision-making process in the face of climate change, and why our subversion plan is necessary to the future of our planet and democracy. First, the necessity of the subversion of democracy. When it comes to climate change, the greater good should beat out utopianism. According to NASA, over 1,300 scientists from around the globe forecast a temperature rise of 2.5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit over the next century. What does this mean? We're going to see mass hunger, extreme weather, heightened medical crises, rising sea levels of 8 to 10 feet, and more ravage our Earth. In the face of climate change, democracies have stalled meaningful action because of the very nature of how they operate. Some of the most powerful democracies in the world have known about climate change since the 1900s, yet next to nothing has been done to effectively address it because of political gridlock. In 2020, we have no time left. We need to do something now or we will reach a point of no return. And that is why we imagine something new. We propose the radical vision of the subversion of democracy to respond to climate change. Abandon the rule of law to make climate change the exception. This looks like blocking conservative content that hinders climate action. This looks like invoking fear of climate change's impacts so that everybody rallies for tangible action. This looks like secretly gerrymandering districts to ensure that voters elect leaders who take climate action. This looks like stacking the highest court of the land to make sure that litigators are able to get favorable rulings for climate action. But let me make it clear, these approaches have other major residual benefits. The environment, race, and socioeconomic class are linked. By engaging in these processes of getting people elected who believe climate change is a priority issue, we will also address racial justice and economic justice at the heart of the plan. My partner will go into specifics on this, but using the tools of democracy to engage in subversion for the benefit of all is what is necessary and justified. And why is our dream necessary to protecting vulnerable populations and upholding democracy in the future? That is where we reach our most important point. In the future, if left unaddressed, climate change will actually subvert democracy even more than the steps we propose today. In a world where we don't take immediate action, because climate is linked with race and economic status, people who will be hit the hardest are marginalized groups, indigenous groups, people who are poor, people of color. And over the long term, an estimated 200 people will be hit and displaced from impacts of climate change. More people will lose their homes and also their fundamental rights. Our proposal will give them voice and inclusion that they need in the democratic system. In the status quo, the idea that they have a voice is a facade. In the world of the affirmative, we take a more inclusive society because we are stopping factories and corporations from polluting and harming the most vulnerable population. Therefore, our dream to subvert democracy in the short term for climate action is essential to protecting the planet and democracy in the long term. A cry for life is echoing across the world. What will you do? Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Great. Before I begin, I just want to thank everyone for making this debate possible. So TVE, Difficult Dialogues, everyone who made this debate possible, all the sponsors, all the groups, thank you so much for making this possible. I want to thank and congratulate both our opponents from GW, who I'm excited to debate, as well as all the opponents we had at this tournament. It was wonderful to engage in the discussion of dialogue and ideas that we have. I also want to thank Asher, who, for no fault of his own, convinced me to wake up at 6 a.m. this morning in California to participate in this debate. It is truly a pleasure having this discussion, and I look forward to the rest of this round. Without further ado, we negate. Contention 1, subverting democratic processes is wrong. Democracy means rule by the people. The alternative is a system which concentrates power in the hands of a few. This is fundamentally unjust because it does not treat people equally. It's wrong for people to have more power based on the circumstances of their birth. And more importantly, it leads to bad outcomes where people with concentrated power oppress those without power. With this in mind, I want to address the two elephants in the room. One, AF says they're okay because they're not throwing democracy out of the window. They're only subverting it for the purpose of climate change. In other words, they say it's okay to be a bit undemocratic as long as it's for a really important issue. Unfortunately, there is no principled way to have a democracy if people are democratic except when they care a lot about a specific issue. Because in any reasonable society, people are going to deeply disagree with each other about climate change, about policy decisions, and even about ethical questions. Society will break down if people ignore institutional procedures on issues they feel are important. For example, what if you believe taxation is theft or abortion is murder? Should you rise up against the United States government? Probably not. What it means to be democratic is to respect the process even when you disagree with it. The second problem that AF outlines is they say our democracy has problems. There's concentrations of power by the wealthy, by oil industry, whatever. We aren't addressing climate change well. What should we do about it? Our solution broadly is to reaffirm democratic norms. Climate change is fundamentally a democratic problem because climate change impacts the least well off. It is fence-line communities, people who don't have access to power. The solution then is to return the power to the people with reforms to campaign finance, to massively register voters, to fight back against voter ID laws. This is the sustainable way to solve climate change. It's not packing the courts, which then the Republicans will do when they get into power 4 years later. Contention to this is counterproductive. AF has to defend active subversion of democratic processes on the part of environmentalists, especially in a context today where the vast majority of democracies have a consensus that climate change is a threat. This is likely to be counterproductive and massively harm the cause because active subversion of democratic processes is unpalatable to the mass of voters that are far more likely to retaliate against what they see as a disenfranchisement of rights. CF, the reason that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris refuse to take a stance on court packing because it is exactly the AF's model that is so unpalatable to a bunch of people who just want to protect the norms of their country. And we recognize that this means that change is slower, but the important part is that voters are less likely to reject this as a whole and reject this en masse. And this is important because it's similar to what happened with environmental terrorism, where a bunch of people then associated radical bombers with the environmental movement, pushing the environmental movement back 30 years and disenfranchising people that pushed for reasonable solutions like cap and trade or carbon tax. The impact is severe. Not only do governments lose legitimacy by pursuing undemocratic policies, but the climate change movement loses traction as a whole. Contention 3, democracies fix climate change better for 4 reasons. 1, corruption. Authoritarians are much more likely to consolidate things like natural resources for the elite. For example, the concentration of state authority in executive institutions, which is necessary for AF to get their case of rapid formulating climate change policies, does lead to things like corruption over things like oil resources, which then produce excessive emissions. 2, scapegoating. Authoritarian regimes are far more likely to target small and specific groups of people, including minorities or refugees, and label them as terrorists. This is exactly what Egypt did, and it avoided responsibility for large problems like climate change that were threats to their legitimacy. 3, anti-international sentiment. Authoritarian regimes are far more likely to be internationally nationalist and oppose global action. The impact is severe because the only way that you can solve climate change is by bringing together all these countries through legally binding international agreements. Otherwise, you can't convince developed nations not to pollute anymore. Finally, conflict. The more authoritarian a regime is, the greater probability it will provoke crisis. And the impact on war of climate change is severe because military aggression exacerbates environmental problems that lead to greater security risks and more war in the future as natural resources are depleted. Very proud to negate.
All right. So for the first question, I just want to ask, would you agree that our world's most powerful democracies have known about climate change for over a century?
I think our world's most powerful authoritarians have as well. China's known about it for like hundreds of years too.
China hasn't been an authoritarian state for over 100 years, but
I would argue it's definitely, okay, sure, go ahead.
Anyways, thank you. So I also wanted to ask, do Black people and Latinx people make a majority of this country?
No.
All right. Do you think that climate change is an imminent, urgent issue that is going to affect us rapidly and very substantively within the next 50 to 100 years if we don't do anything about it?
Yeah, I do. And I actually think there's an easy way to convince voters this is true. California is on fire. Australia is on fire. Like, these are really easy ways that you can convince the mass of people, not just marginalized and indigenous groups that already fight for environmental change. There's a reason why the vast majority of people in the United States rank climate change as one of their top 3 most important issues. And it's because of the change, like it's because of the massive impacts that you talk about. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Sure. So I think what's interesting is that your argument about subversion just seems to be like lots of nice things that we can do when we get into power that are intended to stack the courts and the legislatures, right?
Well, actually, as the topic statement says, it is subverting democratic processes to respond to the existential threat of climate crisis is justified. So that means
No.
2 things. Number one, if I may speak, number one, it's saying there's an assumption that we can reasonably assume the ability of subversion because of the way this topic statement is worded. Second, is always acts as an equal sign when for these types of sentences. So that means that our job in this debate is to justify the subversion of democratic processes to address the imminent threat of climate change that it has for everybody on this planet.
Yeah, sorry. No, so this was not my question. I agree. I think your model is fine. My question was just that, like, so you can tell me that we're going to stack the courts with, you know, people that care about these sorts of things. This requires like a lot of consolidation of state authority, which I think is the point that you're making. It's like we'll stack the courts, you know, we'll gerrymander. Like this probably like makes it a lot easier for the state to do whatever it wants, right? Like that's your point.
So again, back to the topic statement, you can reasonably assume from the topic statement that you have the ability to subvert democracy. And so we are saying that on the assumption that we can subvert democracy, these are the things that we are going to do. And we give you all the reasons why we believe doing all these will help address climate change.
I agree. I'm saying that, like, I'm not saying that you can't subvert democracy. I'm just asking, like, is this the way you're trying to do it, where you consolidate state authority? Like that's all my question is. Like, I think the implicit presumption of stacking the courts and gerrymandering is just like the state gets a lot more authority. Like that's the only question I was asking.
I don't think it's a discussion of the state getting more authority, because we say we're keeping the democratic system, we're just using the system, and again subverting it by like gerrymandering in favor of climate change actors and climate change champions, so that we are addressing climate change. It's not any push towards what you're trying to say.
Yep, cool.
And then how much time do we have left?
We have 2 minutes for prep, correct?
Yes.
We're going to start prep time. 1 second. Right now. Start prep now. Stop prep. 27, use 27 seconds. All right. So before I start, I just want to say thank you to a couple of people. I want to thank the sponsors of these debates. You know, it's been really fun. You know, especially you all have made it very easy to transition, especially to the virtual format, given the circumstances. Specifically like the dialogues that we're having as a result of this debate competition, I think are very integral and give power to the voice of the youth, because, you know, as they say, you know, we're not the leaders of tomorrow, we're the, you know, leaders of today. And I think that this is a good forum for that. Second, I'd like to thank, you know, Harvard. You know, I'm looking forward to, you know, debating you all. You know, it's fun always to debate some, you know, very talented people. And lastly, I would like to thank my team, my partner, Cynthia. You've been a rock star. I know, you know, you weren't feeling well, but you powered through it, and we made it. I want to thank our coach, Paul. You know, he's been very integral to our formation of these arguments and kind of just preparing and giving us confidence. And also to the rest of my team, specifically Shaki and Sam. You know, you guys were there for us. You let us beat you basically at Sebi's. No, it was fun debating you all. And I'd like to just thank my family and God for helping me and supporting me through college and getting me this platform. So with that, I would like to begin. All right. A cry for life is echoing across the world. As conversations of systemic racism are at the forefront, it shows the realities of environmental racism. When those leaders who are said to be upholding the democratic principles and by protecting the rights of the public are the ones using tactics like tactics to kill the people of that democratic processes and that are not being represented, people of color, poor people, and the environment alike are dying from climate change. This is reality, and this is why we need to engage in an approach of eco-phenomenology where nature is not external to us, but rather the same. We say this currently there is a separation of democratic flesh from the flesh of the world, allowing for the dehumanization of objects, subjects, entities that are viewed as separate from ourselves and leads to the instrumentalization and destruction of our communities. In democracies, the separation of flesh is between those who are in power, i.e. rich people, i.e. often men's corporate interests. They are the ones that are creating the separation, and then the rest of the people that are objectified are people of color, are these indigenous groups, are people of lower socioeconomic classes, and are the environments that they live in. These are the ones that there's a division between the two, and they are intrinsically linked. Black, brown, indigenous, lower wealth communities are the ones that are affected by the deadliest toxic pollutants. These communities are often sacrifice zones where they dump toxic waste into them, and they are also created into killing zones. These are the communities that where the individuals get cancer, liver, kidney, lung, and other heart diseases, like Eric Garner, who had asthma, who was a victim of climate change, and the democratic processes that exist today, where his killers get to go free. Climate change is, as Elizabeth Yam-Pierre, the co-chair of Climate Justice Alliance, states that the climate change is directly related to slavery and colonialism, and is rather a continuation of that legacy. But furthermore, in a global context, the effects of slavery and colonialism, of capitalism, still continue to destruct the lives of the most marginalized. We see this in countries, especially also in India, where we see the enormous amounts of pollution in the river Ganga that is polluted to the brim, and people are living in and working in these landmines where there are enormous amounts of methane release, and these create more problems. And so I want to go on to specifically the other team's argument. We make this overarching, our framework is that we have the assumption that the ability of subversion and the fact that it's justified, and that the idea of democracy is power of the people. It's to all the people. The current consolidation of power is within the ruling elite. Therefore, when they first talk, their first argument about subversion being wrong and saying that we put the power in the hands of the few, the power is to the people. We change this through our methods of things like gerrymandering, where we redistrict these communities in order to have people that are more connected to the people in those forms of power, i.e. people like AOC and Corey Davis, who are on the front lines of these issues and are actually engaging with their communities. This argument about they said that there's no principle in democracy if you make the exception for climate change, but this is an existential crisis that is linked to racism and these capitalist problems. And the solution, they say, is reforming these laws of campaign finance. But that's not enough, because the way that capitalism works, it constantly shifts itself in order to justify it. So the second argument they talk about is how the AF has to defend the AF's defense is counterproductive, because we piss off voters, but we don't piss off voters because we change the voter demographic and the people who are in power within these communities. And you engage in practices like fear mongering, and that where we use this alarmist rhetoric, which is not just alarmist rhetoric, but the rhetoric of reality, where we talk about how climate change and racism and environmental economic injustice is at the core of the problem. And they make that the impact is a loss of legitimacy. The democratic processes don't have legitimacy already because they're already exclusionary. If you look at the people who are in power, their third and final argument is saying that democracy solves better than authoritarianism. We are not defending authoritarianism. Rather, we're talking about using the tools of the state against the state in order to make sure that the people of color, indigenous folk, the people that are fighting the fight for the environmental justice are at the forefront and their voices are heard. If that requires us to gerrymander, pack the courts, we are engaging in those practices. They say that we scapegoat and we engage in the anti-international and nationalist rhetoric. We create an intersectional approach that actually takes into account the differences that we have within society and giving the power to the people, which is what democracies is. So we need to subvert democracy temporarily so we can create a better democracy in the long run. And for that, I'm so proud to affirm.
All right. Before I begin, I want to very quickly thank people. First, I want to thank everyone who organized this debate. There's a lot of people. It was a lot of work. I'm not going to list them all, but I am really grateful. I've had a really good time, and I think this is a wonderful event. I want to thank my opponents, who I am currently having a wonderful time debating. And lastly, I want to thank my partner, Aditya, who is, debating with him is one of the joys of my life. I'm so happy I got to do it. So enough said about that. The first question I want to talk about is, everyone wants the same thing. Everyone wants to solve climate change. Everyone wants to, protect marginalized communities who are most impacted by climate change. So how do we evaluate this debate? So first, I agree with the Gov. I agree with the affirmation team, which says that they don't have to defend every instance of democratic subversion. They have to demonstrate it's justified, right? What I'm going to say is that, we should think of this as a conversation between environmental activists, which honestly may be, right? And we should think about whether we should take this issue off the table. Or this particular tactic of subversion off the table. We think you should take it off the table because the second you say the words, we are abandoning rule of law, the second you say the words, we are subverting the democratic process, that is when the environmental movement will lose all traction. That's when the country devolves potentially into a power struggle, which the environmental movement is not going to win. Second, I want to say, it's true that, the resolution assumes to some extent that we have the power to subvert democratic processes. But I want to be clear. We don't have a magic wand, right? It's not realistic to talk about if we had the power to pack the courts or we had total power of the government, what would we do? We have to talk at least within the realm of practicability. And I think that's what we're going to talk about. So OP seems to think that there are a lot of marginalized communities out there who are disproportionately impacted by climate change, which is true. But that suddenly, if they decide to pack the courts, if they secretly gerrymander the country, if they block conservative content on social media, that'll be it. We'll just win. The environmental movement will be successful. I think this is wrong, because if they're right that these people are so disempowered to begin with, they will lose this power struggle. That is to say, when you take democracy and you turn it from a conversation where people are trying to persuade each other into something where you're trying to just take institutions and beat each other into submission, you're more likely to lose, right? Especially if you're disenfranchised and a minority to begin with. So I really don't think that these solutions that the government is proposing are practical in any sense. I think, yes, there's a cry for help echoing across the world, but the answer is not to subvert democracy. The answer is to answer that cry together, because I do think that climate change affects literally everyone, and we're likely to mobilize people for that reason. I want to talk about some specifics of what the Gov team brought you. First, they said that it's going to be good to expand executive powers to fight climate change. So here's an example of what happens. This is sort of a concrete instantiation of the corruption arguments that we talked about in our case. I love Obama, but Obama expanded executive powers. What has happened? Trump has used those during the coronavirus to fire scientists, to fire inspector generals who are just trying to do their jobs. The more power you give the executives, right? It may be good when you get in office, but the second the other side gets in office, the second they see an opportunity, they use it against you. If we pack the court, Republicans will pack it and then strike down things like, the Endangered Species Act, whatever they don't like. Second, I want to talk about their argument about, subversion to protect people, especially marginalized communities who are disproportionately impacted by climate change. I really think that the argument they're making is sort of a democratic argument which they've attached the word subversion to. Democracy is about equality. Democracy is about protecting everyone. And to be honest, everyone needs to be protected. I think I like the example Aditya brought up, that California is on fire. The sky is literally orange. People are smart enough to see, especially as climate change gets worse, that we need to stop it. We need to fight it. But I think we're just more likely to be successful if we do it together. And we don't alienate people in democracies who care about democracy, right? Like this is happening in places like Germany with 60% renewable power. But people in Germany like democracy. The second you say, to go that additional 40%, from 60% renewable to 100% renewable, we have to abandon rule of law. We think that's going to turn millions of people away from the movement. Frankly, that would turn me away from the movement. And I think that's a really serious problem. So, why does this mean you take the option off the table? Because it doesn't matter what specifically you do, whether you pack the court, whether you secretly gerrymander, it doesn't matter what Gov proposes. The second you frame this issue as antithetical to democracy is when you lose the support of most people and you don't get to do things you want, that the country develops into a power struggle, which environmental activists will lose. We are so proud to propose the best way to solve climate change is together.
Are we ready for Crossfire, Asher?
Yeah.
All right. You mind if I ask the first question?
Sure.
Okay, so you specifically talk about how the principles of democracy are a true representation of the people. And so do you agree with the statement, yes or no, answer is fine, that the current system of democracy is representative of all the individuals within the United States? It's representative of people like the people at Standing Rock that are fighting for, for preservation of their water.
Don't agree. Here's my point. I don't agree. I think the system needs to change, right? Look, I'm not going to pretend that we're solving climate change right now, right? We've made a lot of progress. I think democracies have done a good job, but clearly it's not been sufficient. My point is this. The solution, we want to change the system. The solution is not to throw the system out the window, right? The solution is not to say democracy isn't working. We need to appoint people, kings. We need to, whatever you want to do, right? The solution is to say the reason it's not working is because we are not democratic enough, because we are not standing up for people. We're not standing up for the ideals we believe in about equality and protecting people who need our protection, right?
Okay, so just a quick follow-up to that, if you don't mind. Do you agree with the, my partner specifically asked Aditya about, the numbers for the population, right? And so, democracy being, representative of the people, do you think that the people that often make up the governments within countries, both in the United States and across the world, do you agree that those groups of the ruling people within those countries are often homogenous in their characteristics?
Sure. I think, look, I'm not going to deny that, like, for example, white people have more power in the status quo, right? My point is not that, democracy is perfect right now. My point is that you're framing the solution as like, oh, democracy is flawed right now. That means we should get rid of democracy, right? It's not true. Like, obviously, we need to deconcentrate power. I want to fight oil companies. I want to register people to vote. I want to get rid of voting ID laws. But I'm trying to frame that as an expansion of the democratic project, which is, by the way, massively popular in almost every democracy, right? Instead of framing it as, let's get rid of the system because it's not working. Does that answer your question? Can I ask one?
Yes, go ahead.
So, like, I guess I just sort of want to know the story of what happens on your side of the house. What are the sequence of actions that happen that lead to us, being able to stop
definitely. So I think that, we made it clear at the end of my speech is that, we use the tools of democracy against itself in the short run in order to create a better democracy in the long run. So this temporary subversion is what is at the forefront. But to give you specifically what the view of the world is, that we engage in these practices, i.e. like gerrymandering, right? We gerrymander districts to where indigenous people, where African-American people, where people of color in these lower socioeconomic classes are represented by representatives that are connected with the people, i.e. people like Corey, like Miss Corey Bush in Ferguson, Missouri, people like AOC in New York.
Sorry. So my question is just, why doesn't the other side gerrymander back? As soon as we explicitly say we're going to gerrymander, why don't they do the same thing?
Yeah, because we say that in this subversion of power, when we're putting these, minority groups and these groups that are oppressed within power, once they're in power, they will shift and change the system of democracy to be more representative of all people rather than the status quo.
But that's like you're like subverting democracy, and then you're like, oh, but we want a better democracy, right? Why don't you just
we have to subvert temporarily in order for a better democracy in the long run. And currently in the status quo, there is no change happening. There is constant rollback on actual reforms for these individuals in these communities that never work.
I'm happy to keep talking, but I think that's time is all. So
okay,
sorry about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to take about a minute of prep time. Thank y'all. At the end of the day, think of which team gives you tangible action that helps create a framework that addresses climate change within the next century. They say that the environmental movement will fall into a power struggle when we say it, but we aren't going to say it. Our plan is all backroom deals that nobody will find out. Things like gerrymandering that is drawn without people knowing about it. They argue for conversation, but conversation doesn't work. People in the minority are disempowered because they have no voice. And as my opponent said in the cross arguments, people in the minority don't make up the majority. And so that means that if we promote more democracy, their voices are only going to get flooded out even more, versus in our case where we are gerrymandering districts to elevate the voices of people in the minority, to elevate the voices of climate defenders who are going to make tangible steps to create action. And they have this argument about power to the executive. First of all, we don't change the process or the structure. And then they say courts and legislature, which are completely separate from the executive. There are 3 separate branches of government, and we argue for different actions in all 3. Now, they also say that we can convince voters to vote differently if we tell them about the wildfires, but that's clearly not the case. We have a movement of conservative populism, and Trump doesn't buy it, and neither does his million supporters. And the fact is, we have found scientific evidence. Facts don't change people's minds, especially if they already have an opinion. When scientists did a study with climate deniers and believers, when they presented them evidence from from one side or the other, the people who got the evidence that confirmed their beliefs went even farther to their predispositions. The people who got evidence that was against their beliefs just ended up ignoring it and not changing their opinions. And so that is definitely not a case. And then finally, they defend democracy, which is inherently tied to capitalism, according to a University of Arizona scholar. And so when they defend a system that completely defends the destruction of our environment, that is against everything that we stand for. So vote for the side that gives you actual change. Vote for the side that's going to get stuff done within the next century. Vote for the affirmative.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? And is everyone ready? Great. Just let me know if you can't hear me, and then I think that's great. Rush, you good? Great. Cool. 3, 2, 1. They lost the debate. Their solution was to gerrymander all the courts and all the districts so that you could get into power and then just reverse everything that you did before. Look, we want democracy. We want to fix democracy the same way that they're due. But our solution is eminently more palatable. Just think of it. If I were to go around and tell you, and I want to be clear here, they say everything is going to happen in backroom deals. Guys, you can't stack the courts secretly. People will know when you appoint judges to the courts. You can't redistrict secretly because guess what? People are like, wait a second, I'm not in District 1, I'm in District 2 now. And I think the problem is all of these solutions are eminently more palatable on our side. If I were to tell an undecided voter, hey, I want to stack the courts versus, hey, I want to make sure that your friends are able to vote. That is the solution that actually makes sure that we have democracy. Asher was correct about this the whole time. 1, on their side, democracy breaks. And I think the problem here is we agree with Ath that it can break democracy. But the problem is, once it's broken, you can't unbreak it. I think this is so important. Because imagine what happens when everyone can just gerrymander and stack the courts. Because the bottom line is, they are correct. And this makes it so much worse. Because the rich are the ones that have the money, the power, the control over the media. So when you just break all the rules and say it's okay to break the rules, the rich are the ones who can get away with it. They're the ones who can stack the courts and pay off all the congressmen because they're the ones who make it possible. But when we ban that and say no campaign finance on our side, that is significantly better. So on their side, the problem is the Republicans are going to break the courts and they're going to do it much better than we could ever do, which means their solution is out of the water. I think the importance here is Trump, who's using a bunch of executive orders to roll back regulation. The comparative, and I think they say that people just don't respond to climate change. And I think this isn't true. Voters, just because they're not marginalized does not mean that they don't respond and care about climate change. 60% of Germany is renewable. Trump right now is losing by 10 to 15% against a candidate who for the first time in American history has said, I oppose fossil fuel subsidies and we're going to phase out fossil fuel entirely. You do not need radical subversion of democracy. You need to continue the process because that is what people care about. Anything else is bad. Very, very proud. Cool. Bancroft?
Yes. How long is it? 2 minutes, right?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right. I'm ready to go if whenever Asher and Cynthia.
Yeah, ready to go whenever.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right.
Cool. You guys?
Yep. So I have a quick question. So you talk about changing these campaign finance laws, and that when the rich are in power, that they can always influence these movements, right? So do you think that the rich are influencing the momentum of social movements like Black Lives Matter?
No. So here's, I think, and I want to be very clear about what the counterfactual is. I think it's really easy for people to tap into movements that talk about how democracy is good and talk about how you want to reform gerrymandering and change that sort of thing. Because if I told you that 15 million people were disenfranchised just because of a mandatory minimum and because of felon disenfranchisement, you're like, that's screwed up. We should change that. On the other hand, if like Republicans and Fox News and everyone who controls the media then says, no, see, the problem is the Democrats want to pack the courts. That's what people don't like. It's why Joe Biden and Kamala Harris refuse to like say anything about packing the courts, because they don't want to seem like they're taking the radical, subversive Democratic stances, because they know that's what scares people.
So how does that apply within the framework that we've been given by the topic, which says that we can assume the ability to subvert, and we have to just rather prove that it is justified, not in terms of its feasibility?
Guys, we all assume that you can do it. I want to be clear about what their side of the debate looks like. Their side of the debate looks like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris being like, yeah, we're going to pack the courts. And this is right. Like, they're going to pack the courts for 4 years. And then what's going to happen is exactly what happened before, which is like a wave of populists that don't like you doing this are going to come in, and then they're going to pack the courts themselves. And this is the problem, because we can't just assume that once you elect a Democrat once, you just elect them in perpetuity. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, we know that power changes hands all the time. And I think the problem is you guys needed to get like, the reason we care so much about democracy is because it means that there are like stable things that we can expect. Like, regardless of a Republican or a Democrat in the next administration, we know what's going to happen. The difference is if Democrats are willing to pack the courts and Republicans come in and pack the courts, and that just leads to massive consequences. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, with all due respect. So a lot of what you're saying, totally understand. But besides the fact, when you look at federal judgeships or when you look at judgeships, they last way beyond terms, correct?
Yeah.
And you agree that this is an urgent issue, right? That needs to be resolved within the next 100 years.
No, I think, I mean, look, like, I don't think, like, I think climate change is an urgent issue. I think climate change is an urgent issue. But I feel like if you're going to introduce an argument about whether or not we need to solve it in the next 5 versus 10 versus 20 years, like, I think it's a little too late in the debate.
So 5, 10 counts as next 100 years.
Look, you know, there's a narrative that's like, you know, climate change is do or die. At like one moment, the planet will collapse if we don't stop emissions. I'm not like an expert, but I don't think this is true. I think it's better to solve it earlier, but it's not like we are dead if there's like this one day where it makes a difference, right?
With all due respect, we never claimed a doomsday, but I think all 4 of us can agree that this is an imminent issue that, as we presented evidence in our speech,
Cindy, I agree. I think the only problem is if you try to fix it now.
Speaking, sir. With all due respect, on the topic of everything that we've said, so you agree though that redistricting lasts for a long time, like at least a decade?
No, we never agreed to that, and I think your time's been up.
Oh, okay. Well.
I'll take how much prep do I have? 2 minutes? I'll take
I think it's me first, right?
Oh, I'm so done. I'm sorry.
Yeah. There you go. You're fine. And I think how much prep do we have left? I had it written down. 20 seconds. Cynthia, how much prep do we have?
I don't, sorry, I haven't kept track.
I think you have like.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
I think exactly a little under 2 minutes.
Okay.
We trust you. Just have fun.
I'm ready to go if everybody's ready. Once again, I want to say thank you to everybody. I really appreciate this opportunity. Yeah, and let's get started. All right. this debate comes down to the way we are framing it. We've originally said that we can assume the ability to subvert and prove, and rather it's a question of proving it's justified. And the negative is specifically talking about an indictment of the forms of democracy, right? And they say that we've lost the debate because we gerrymander, and that doesn't actually change the systems of power because it can be shifted back. But rather we're making the emphasis that democracy is broken right now, right? The democratic ideals currently that they want to reaffirm, that they want to engage in, don't actually change the status quo. Rather, it is a reaffirmation of those discriminatory principles that take away power from groups like the tribe of Standing Rock. It takes away power from groups like Black Lives Matter. Rather, we are pulling off of that momentum in order to create these young activists and these leaders in order to actually create these actual change. James Painter from the University of Oxford and Reuters Institute showed that climate skepticism, which is the highest in the United States of all countries, is the very thing holding us in. Is predominantly an Anglo-Saxon phenomenon, and it shows that the conversation is very one-sided. And so the question comes down to who can create the most tangible and better form of change. And so when we say we want leaders, right? We want to elect people like Vic Barrett. We want people like Vic Barrett, Anissa Khan, Mikasa Lookinghorse, Helena Gualinga, those types of youth activists to be in power because they can actually change the form of democracy. Question of democracy here is that democracy is a representation of the people. The negative fails to acknowledge the fact that the democracy within the status quo is not representative of the people, but rather of those corporate interests and those people at the top. Rather, they say they want to change campaign finance laws, but the way capitalism works is it shifts itself. It'll go from changing campaign finance laws to the way of getting money within the pockets of into the pockets of the senators that are there. And the homogenous groups that are in power within these countries are very disconnected from the actual individuals on the ground. And that's why we want to change this narrative, and we want to change it through forms like gerrymandering and court packing. And people actually usually don't care about their voting districts as much as they do. And we want to piss off those rich people and those people in power and give the power to the people. And therefore, I'm very proud to oppose.
Asher, are you taking any prep? I don't know if you have any time. I don't know.
Oh yeah, sorry. Can I take? I think we have 2 minutes, right? So I won't take the whole thing. I'll just take a little bit. But
sounds good.
all right, is everyone ready? I guess a better question is anyone not ready? All right. Thanks again, everyone, for the debate. I want to talk about 2 things in this speech. The first is why their solution doesn't work. They seem to think that if you break the system, right, if you gerrymander, if you stack the courts, and then you use your incredible power to make the country perfectly equal, that you can just go back to the system the way it was, but better. This is not true. Once you break the system, you cannot go back. The reason for this is that we live in a deeply divided society. People disagree fundamentally about whether climate change is more or less important than the economy. I passionately believe that climate change is more important. But here's the problem. Even if we wave a magic wand and I could impose my views on the rest of society initially, they would not listen in the long term. People will literally riot in the streets if they hear about these secret backroom deals to take over the government by the environment. And like, that sounds radical, but I'm using words that the opposition used, or that the affirmation used, right? I think the problem, right, is like, it would be great if we could wave this magic wand, but we have to try to fix these problems in such a way that we incorporate people into the movement as opposed to alienating people. And by the way, one of those people would be me. I love climate change, but I also believe in democracy. I think we have to work together to solve problems. I think we have to persuade people. We can't just try to rule by force or by these backroom deals. Second, Why does our work? I don't want to pretend that our democracy is perfect. It actually is quite bad in a lot of ways. We are not solving climate change the way we should. So what are we advocating? We are advocating massively enfranchising voters, fighting things like voter ID laws, getting rid of mandatory minimums, and framing this as an expansion of the democratic project we are already engaged in, as an expansion of the democratic ideals we have already committed to. I think this is persuasive. I also think it will solve climate change because I think everyone is affected by climate change. It's true, marginalized communities are hurt the most, but so is literally the entire state of California. The sky is orange, right? As things get worse and as you start to make the country more democratic, you are able to convince people to vote in favor of climate change policies. Why is this a better way? Because it is sustainable. Because once you persuade people that this is the right thing to do, you don't run the risk that they then pack the court after you do, right? You actually have a sustainable solution. This matters because even if we solve climate change for 2 years under their model, these policies get rolled back, you get no real progress. We're very proud to propose solve things together.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Good job, everybody. How would the host like us to make our decision? Don't all talk at once.
Yeah, that was amazing. Great job, everyone. I hope you guys had a lot of fun because it was a lot of fun to watch that and very thought-provoking. So we don't have a great format to break the judges off into a separate room. So for this round, all the judges are going to vote independently. So just fill out your ballots and it's going to be a majority situation. But I mean, feel free to chat each other if you'd like to discuss something. Yeah, we're just going to have the deliberation happen independently.
Thank you, Survey. So for sure, you can go on Tab Room, fill out your ballot, and we will invite all judges to give their take on their decision, why you decided on the specific team. But please don't announce which team you chose during that time. We will announce it after each judge can reflect. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so while we have the judges collecting their thoughts and putting in their decisions, we have some films to share that just are, so we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for judges to fill out ballots. And in the meantime, we're gonna share some really great videos that really showcase the Global Sustainability Film Awards event that's happening in November. And that we hope any of you who are attending this are able to join for. So I think
the power of film and storytelling can't be underestimated to create change. But the challenge is big.
I fundamentally believe that film has a hugely important role to play in helping people understand and engage and be inspired to act about the huge environmental challenges that are facing our planet.
These pioneers already have the answers that we need.
Conservationists and local people have shown just what a difference can be made when we work together.
The team has therefore found a sustainable, groundbreaking design solution, one that can be retrofitted easily at a low cost and adapted to other regions around the globe.
Fair trade has worked so hard for the last 20 years to create a model of business with purpose.
And thousands of people thrown out of work, boats beached, canneries emptied, and I think that's where I began to understand that there'll be no jobs on a dead planet.
When we started the Global Sustainability Film Awards, the idea was not just to do corporate social responsibility outside of the company, but also to change things within.
Hi, my name is Richard. I'm the Director of Programs here at the American Center in New Delhi. We're delighted to be working today with Difficult Dialogues to bring this debate.
It's a part of me, daring debates. And I'm one of those who have dared to debate the patriarchy, the construct that we live in.
As lawyers pleading the cases and not by the theme as suggested.
When I entered the gender studies classroom, what I was told was the first thing, that masculinity and femininity are inherent traits in all of us, which explains a lot. When I sit with my legs wide open in my house and my mother never fails to point out. She tells me you're being masculine. She tells me this will not do good with your husband.
Do you think students in private schools will become pleasant, or do you think students in government schools will become pleasant?
Students from both domains are able to handle pressure. In private, I think it's more because they have an added burden of homework, extracurricular activities and other stuff.
Only vocation theoretical knowledge is no longer enough to put you ahead of the competition. And private institutions are willing to go that extra mile for you.
I was just so really impressed and overwhelmed by the depth and clarity of your understanding.
We do not fight because of material, because of diamonds. That is why we took up arms, because people have been misusing the natural resources of this country to enrich themselves.
Coral is become dying and no more fish. It's like a sick ocean.
%90 of fisheries globally are already fully exploited.
There can't be a happy ending until we all
wake up to the rhythm of disruption, worldwide eruptions because we're sick of the corruption.
Now is the time to look at problems beyond food, shelter and clothing. Let the ideas start flowing. Let's have unheard vichar.
very great ones who are out
I've realized that the Me Too movement comes from deep trauma.
As a woman director, when my crew talks to me in a certain way, I know they're talking to me like that because I'm a woman.
How do we bring all the streams of financing together to enhance a learning environment in the school?
So let's say religion is in education, but it shouldn't be taken as gospel.
But we do need to change the conversation behind screen if we want to see the conversation changing on screen.
I don't think cinema can really make a change in the society or can bring about any revolution in the society, but it is responsible for bringing or keeping that issue under constant discussion. We don't forget it.
It is not that these issues are not being responded to. They are being responded to. There is enormous action.
A dialogue that should not get over here. This is an important dialogue. This needs to continue amongst the people in the communities.
We do not fight because of material, because of diamonds. That is why we took up arms, because people have been misusing the natural resources of this country to enrich themselves.
Coral is become dying and no more fish. It's like a sick ocean.
%90 of fisheries globally are already fully exploited.
There can't be a happy ending until we all
Wake up to the rhythm of disruption, worldwide eruptions because we're sick of the corruption.
Great. So I hope you all enjoyed those videos. And once again, thank you so much to the debaters. I know it's been a marathon day for some of the debaters, if not all, and the judges since early this morning. So really impressed by your ability to keep your energy up, and the passion really came through. And so thank you. And yeah, just to reflect a little bit more on this topic, I am an environmental lawyer. I have kind of devoted my life to working within the system with the laws that we have. And, I feel like in recent years, especially, like the day that Trump was elected president, it really did call into question, like, what is the most effective use of my advocacy? Like, should I just go lie down in front of like stop a pipeline or something? Like, is what can I do with the laws if they're not actually being written? And so, yeah, so I think this is just like a very a topic that's gotten me thinking a lot. And I really loved the arguments that came up today. I think there were a lot of like really interesting framing and examples and things that like I hadn't thought of before. And so it was really great to hear from all of you who have given this some serious thought over the last couple of weeks. It really opened my eyes to it. And I think, and yeah, I mean, I'm curious from a lot of the judges here who also, are working on climate change as well as other issues, like their perspective on the issue, whether it changed and how it might have changed after hearing your arguments today. But I think we have a winner now. And so I think we can announce the result, and then it would be great for the judges to give a little bit of feedback to the debaters and talk about kind of what was the most convincing arguments they heard and why they ended up voting the way they did. So Saranel, do you want to announce the winner?
Yes, thank you, Survey. So we have a winner. And so in first place, we have Asher Spector and Aditya Dar from Harvard. And so they'll get to represent the US in the international rounds in November. So now we invite all judges to reflect on their decisions and the compelling arguments that they heard throughout. So perhaps Martha, you'd like to start?
Sure. Well, just to start, it was an incredibly difficult decision to make, and I'm glad that you pushed us to make it in a short amount of time, because I'm sure I could have agonized over it for a lot longer. Just enormous congratulations to all the participants. It was incredibly energizing to see just how much care and thought you put into your positions and the really strong advocacy and thoughtful considerations that you wove in. I think, one thing that really struck me was the passion that you all felt for deep concern about the climate crisis and the need to find a way to tackle the challenge immediately and make progress as swiftly and as possible in a way that really tackles the scale of the challenge at hand. And it just shone through in a way that, again, was really so encouraging as someone who's been working on this for not that long, but I guess 10 or 20 years at this point. Still a long ways to go. But I think ultimately where I landed was, just because of the format of the debate, trying to think of which team was able, really focus on taking their concern about climate change and tying it to their position in the debate, and tying that concern and that urgency to how it justified their particular position, pro or con, against the particular resolution. And it was a really hard call, but ultimately I felt that the Dar Spector team focused very much on clarifying where and how they felt that the urgency and the scale of the challenge really weighed on their side of the resolution. But it was, again, I'm really glad that you guys kept us to a very short amount of time to write in our ballots, because it was a really hard decision, and congratulations to everyone involved.
I can go next if no one else wants to go. So yeah, I voted con because I thought that there was substantial disadds to the plan. The first one and the most glaring one was the authoritarianism claims, simply because of the way that you phrased your idea in the first speech, as in these are the things that we'll deliberately do in order to subvert democracy. I think that gives them a lot of space to kind of levy these claims against you. And for a lot of the debate, you're saying, not us, we're not authoritarian. But I think that they're making a claim that you're kind of gesturing towards an undemocratic procedural flip of power that you would give the state. I think that the cross-examination was very strong, the crossfire was very strong in asking you those questions, specifically to Cynthia. I felt as though I'm glad that we both sides agree that climate change is an existential threat. And you asked and labored over the question of how to solve that. And in doing so, you kind of were able to identify some of those external implications to either or both sides. I was persuaded more by the claim that deliberative democracies and deliberation can probably garner us afford us either the same amount of advancement against climate change, or more, right? Things like enfranchisement, and things like holding elected officials to their word and stuff like that. I think that was good, and there were a portion in the beginning of the debate where one of the speakers talked about cap and trade and carbon taxing and all of those other things, where I think you could have took more of that argument and made it a claim as to why there are safeguards and institutional precautions in democracy, specifically this one, to kind of prevent these kind of things to run away and run its course. Good job, everybody.
I can go next. Well, first of all, congratulations to both teams. I thought you both did an amazing job, and it was a real pleasure to hear both of your arguments. I think you laid it out really well, and it's an accomplishment to be here, so congratulations to you both. I thought that you both had very strong opening statements. However, I did feel that the affirmative didn't articulate the threshold clearly, or make a strong case for what that was, like the timeline, for example, like how, like the urgency that we need to address the climate crisis. You could have mentioned that public opinion polls already show that the American public wants action on climate, versus stating that you would change public opinion through fear mongering, right? Which to the negatives team is kind of like, these are kind of scary words or whatnot. But actually you could have started from the assumption that democratic processes have already been subverted, and therefore and is actually now the norm. So to correctly address the climate crisis, you need to further subvert the democratic process to properly address the climate crisis. Whereas the negatives argument was predicated on the fact that democratic processes work and are working, and you never negated that fact. So I think that in doing that, I think that making the case and examples of all the reasons why, like pulling in examples of why democratic processes, like showing that they have already been subverted, therefore it's the status quo, and continuing that is bad. And you have to kind of further subvert this, and matching public opinion to action would have tipped the scale for me in terms of the affirmative. So I think that just kind of came out through the rounds, but I think you both did a really phenomenal job, and congratulations to you both.
All right, I guess I can go next. Congratulations to everybody. This was a really great debate, and it's been a good day today. I am in a similar boat with Martha, where I sort of think about, what's going on and sort of how everything has been topsy-turvy. So it's been interesting to hear these ideas, because I will say in the science policy realm, we're constantly rethinking what we already thought was working, and it's not anymore. So thinking about how to change things is something that is on our mind as well. I will agree that I would have liked to have seen more argument about what the timeline we were working on was. I think that was a bit confusing for me. So, during this temporary suspension, would your plan have solved the climate crisis during that time? Or was it afterwards where that temporary suspension was over? And so sort of like just more details on the plan of what emission scenarios are we looking at? How are you driving down emissions? What's the timeline that you're planning to accomplish that? The other argument that I really liked hearing actually from both sides today was about to climate change effects. And it seemed that both sides really, were in agreement that climate change has the most significant effects on marginalized communities. But the NEG kept coming back to say that climate change also is affecting everyone, with the California example. There's really great research out there, and I think about differences by gender, actually. So there's a lot of cool research that climate change affects women more than men. And so I'd suggest looking more into that kind of research just to strengthen your arguments about why we need to focus so much on marginalized communities. I think that argument was there, but can certainly be strengthened with some more research. But everybody did great, and I really appreciate the debate today.
So at this time, we invite Victoria to give any reflection she may have on the decisions. If there are any technical difficulties, we also invite all the debaters today to reflect on their experience and how they feel about the debates and going forward in our discussions about sustainability and democracy. Asher, perhaps you'd like to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, so first, I know we said it a bunch, but I want to say it again, that I'm really thankful to everyone for organizing this. I cannot actually emphasize how much fun I've had at this tournament and how wonderful it has been to participate. Like, I don't know, a lot of debate tournaments are stressful, and like you worry about competitive success, and like, I don't know, also just like this has just been like a great intellectual exercise. I've met people who I already really like, stuff like that. So first, that's enough, but I'll say thank you. Yeah, I mean, I somehow in making arguments about, why democracy is equipped to solve climate change, I persuaded myself a little bit more that it's true and that it's important to do like the hard work of persuading people that it's the right thing to do, but like when that is possible. I don't know if that's just because, you get caught up in the arguments or because it's true. So I'm curious what other people have to think.
Can you? Here, go ahead.
I was going to be rude and popcorn someone, but I'll let you see.
I just wanted to, if you could just reiterate the question.
Also reasonable. I mean, like,
yeah.
I don't know, like, in these debates, we have to take a side, right? So like I take, in the last way, I took the side that like, if like we can actually work within the system to beat this, right? And that like it does affect people enough, and there are tangible enough effects that like if we work hard, we can convince people that and to do the right thing. I went into the day believing that less than I came out of the day believing that. Perhaps because I made the argument a bunch of times. So I'm like interested in people's genuine views on whether that's the case, like aside from which side you were assigned to debate.
I think, I'm in the same boat. So in terms of, first of all, before I say get there, like, again, thank you. Also, Asher and Aditya, congratulations, enjoyed it. And like, this debate tournament, I've debated a lot. And this one, like, in terms of like stress levels, it was like, I was so relaxed and like enjoyed debating and like the conversations. I have 4 midterms or five midterms that I've like been working on. And I was like, I need this debate tournament to like just be stress free so I can like relax and enjoy. And it really has been. So put that out there. And also thank you, Cynthia, for powering through today. But in terms of the question, I think that in preparation, and I think that when we come to like debates, and I think that's the reason why debate is so important, is that you take 2 stances. Once obviously for the affirmative and the negative, and then you have different approaches, one of a policymaker and one of a critical thinker. And I think that they provide us with different ways of seeing the topics. Like when we were preparing for this tournament, and I was thinking about like deliberative, like what does subversion look like? And I have a whole argument I prepared on eco-authoritarianism, but do I really agree with it? I think that like, no, I don't. And I think that like, even by advocating for the subversion, I'm more swayed towards not subverting, but rather the indicts that we make of the systems that don't work kind of brings light to the systems that need to be worked on in terms of like reform. And I think that, it gives us a critical point of reflection on like what is working, who has actual voice, who are the stakeholders at hand. And oftentimes like when we, criticize the system of, like of capitalism and all, it's the same system that we, also thrive off of. So I think that we have to find like a balance in terms of, making sure everyone has a voice and that power is distributed to those groups that need it most. Cause like, I live in Macon, Georgia, and from like maybe like 20, 30 minutes away from me is the like the biggest coal producing power plant, in terms of emissions. And, we've had like groundwater contamination near that area. And, in my attempt to talk with the elected official for a research project I was doing, he basically didn't give me any answers because of like, the corporates, whatever's happening between them and the conversation. So I think that also it brings a light towards transparency. And I think that in order for democracy and to engage in a deliberative democracy, we really need to emphasize and put in the structure for transparency. And I think that like, depending on what happens in this election, will be like a critical point in the direction we take in terms of, environmental sustainability and, just across the world on what we can do. Because I think that there are a lot of vulnerable parties that are not represented at the table.
Absolutely. I first just want to say thank you all again so much for running this tournament. It's honestly been one of my favorite tournaments and it was done so well. And I love that y'all emphasize the youth voice in this. So thank you so much. I know that takes a lot to run a tournament. So we really appreciate your time and just everything that you had to say. I thank you so much, Rush, for being my amazing partner. It was so amazing working with you. And thank you, Asher and Aditya, for being just so sweet and so incredible. I want to be just like y'all, really. And I think that like, and when Rush was saying powering through, so I had a fever last night and I woke up today, and if you saw me at the beginning, my camera was on and off because I was going in and out throwing up because I was really sick this morning. But I'm really glad that I was able to do this, and I'm really appreciative of Rush for putting up with this because every other minute I was texting him like, sorry, gotta be back. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was just such a great debate. I definitely, to answer your question, Asher, though, I mean, I definitely went in very strongly agreeing with the neg side. I still agree with the neg side. I'm an optimist. I just realized I muted myself, but I'm a huge optimist and I just have a lot of faith in our system. And while I know that there are parts of it that are broken, I really believe that our generation is unlike any generation before. We have so many platforms that we can use to advocate for the issues that we believe in. And there's such a big power in numbers. Because at the end of the day, it really, when officials get elected, it is about them getting the numbers to get elected. So I'm very passionate about the neg case. And yeah, like I said, I appreciate all of y'all's times and congratulations to y'all. You're going to do so amazing representing the US on an international level. It's just been such an honor to debate against y'all, and it's been such an honor to be a part of this. So thank y'all for organizing this. Thank y'all for being here.
Yeah, and I guess I'll close up the discussion. Again, a sincere thank you to everyone. Cynthia, I'm very glad that you're feeling better and we're able to debate. It was fantastic debating you and Rush. And Asher, I have such a fantastic, Asher was, the first person I debated with in college. So it's great to be able to debate with him.
Is that true? I'm the first person you debated against.
I think that's true. The tryout, I think, counts. But I think the reason I'm really thankful is just because when I was in like high school and middle school and I would do debate and we would, I would cite like all these scientists and like cited the Union of Concerned Scientists like more than my fair share of times. And I think it's like, it's crazy to think how like far people go from like reading sources to, having the chance to actually talk to you guys. And I just think it's like a really great thing that the debate event has done today. I'm a huge fan of this sort of engagement. And I think, like, in answer to the overall question, I may be more of a pessimist, but I still, like, to some extent, I think believe that, like, the path to change is possible. Maybe I'm just like, I have a little bit more faith in, like, what would happen if we just, like, appointed lots of nice scientists to run, like, the environmental problems of a country, and I think that would be nice. So I think like I'm very happy to say that I'm a little bit more of a pessimist in terms of people, but I think it's just really inspiring to kind of know that there's so many people out there who spend so much of their time. And, like, you know, we you know, we're in school and we talk and we like talking, and we do this because we like talking. We like talking about issues, and all of you, like, spend so much of your time, like, actually making change. And I think that's just fantastic and inspirational. So thank you guys for taking time out of your day, because it really means a lot to us when you do, and it really means a lot to us when you, like, do your normal job. So thank you so much.
I also would like to reiterate on that. Thank you for, like, the work you're doing. Like, I took a class last semester on science as a human endeavor, and it really, like, shows, like, you know, the emphasis. It kind of makes you appreciate more about, you know, all the scientists and all the stakeholders within the scientific realm that really contributed to the conversations. Because I think a lot of the polarization and the division we have in this country is because of a lack of appreciation for you all. And I think that, you know, it is very important that we, you know, we say thank you, and we make sure that you all have a voice in deliberative government, you know, not a subverting democracy. And I kind of have a question for the judges and all. You know, in terms of like a more intersectional approach to science, how do you think that, you know, within these democratic realms that we function in, can we engage in a more intersectional process where we have people of, you know, these communities that are hit hardest at the table and at the forefront? Because, you know, oftentimes I feel like we talk about them, but we don't give them, you know, the platform, or nor do we hear them, but we never execute on the actual issues that they are advocating for.
Yeah, I can go first and talk a little bit about that. I think, yeah, I think there are ways we can absolutely do that. I think it first has to start with scientists knowing how to work with underserved communities first, because I don't think we often do that enough. You know, there's a long history of scientists coming into underserved communities, indigenous communities, and almost using those communities to get scientific knowledge and then leaving, rather than working for those communities or working with those communities. And so we're trying now to establish a more equitable approach to building equity into doing scientific research. So I think that, you know, is a first step. And then I'll just say, you know, more specifically across our federal agencies right now, one thing that I think they can do is invite more communities to participate in the policymaking process. There's a little bit of that, but there are ways to advance it. So take the public comment process. It's a process that's typically done in English, not many other languages. And so it leaves a lot of people who are here in the country out of that process, because English is not everybody's first language here in this country. So there are things like that that our government, you know, little steps like that that they can take that can make a huge difference.
I'll just, I think, kind of piggyback off Jacob's comment a little bit to say that I think in recent years, there has been a huge, more public awareness and realization around climate justice. And it's kind of pushed its way into kind of this mainstream, or the previous mainstream climate movement policy world, in a way that is really brought to bear things that we know are, you know, the fact that communities of color, low-income communities suffer disproportionately. These are things that we've known for decades through research, but things that we never led with. So I think the climate justice movement now is at the forefront, and it also is informing, I think, the way that stakeholder engagement and legislation is being made in a really great way. So for example, just from colleagues and friends, I know that they consulted with environmental justice organizations and communities for the House Select Report. I know the Climate Equity Act was also done in consultation with environmental justice communities. And I think the fact that, one presidential climate platform has climate justice and equity included in it, though one other does not, is just a sign of the fact that we're moving in a way that we're realizing as a policy community that we have to center equity in the way that we make policy. And I think that's been a really exciting development as of late.
I just have like one more question. In terms of like a more scientific discussion, are we like past the brink, or like what like do we have to do in the next like 4 or 5 years, or what is like weighing on the election and like the processes that we have to engage in after the election in order to make sure that we're not past this tipping point? Because I think that's where I can agree with Aditya on like being a pessimist but I think reassurance from scientists to be an optimist would be helpful.
And I think Martha was going to say something, so I just wanted to give her space to.
No, I'll actually respond to that one because it's obviously a really important point. I love the folks who commented on whether they're an optimist or a pessimist. I find myself an optimist in part because I think I just don't. I feel like that's what I need to be able to keep coming back to this work. And keep engaging. And the thing that really gives me hope is that when I was in college, the science of climate change was very clear, but the technical solutions were very far off. So solar power as a affordable, competitive source of electricity was something people had talked about at that point for 30 years. I mean, in the 70s, people started working on solar power research, keep always saying it was going to be competitive. The price was going to come down. And it had been, those kinds of conversations had happened for long enough that I think people were starting to lose faith. And if you look at moments when we've taken meaningful action to address climate change, which have been vastly insufficient, but think about the investments made in the Recovery Act in 2009. Those were transformative in bringing renewable energy costs down because it got up to economies of scale. And now you see a point where we've passed the point where renewable energy is in fact, economic, the most affordable form of electricity in many parts in most of the country. And you can see, right, because we've proved that point, you can see the same transition on the horizon when you think of electric vehicles. Now, there are a lot of sectors and there are, the challenge is significant, but I take those examples of where we've put our shoulder to the grindstone and it has made a difference, and we've actually made, you can see the solutions. We just need to take more action to do them. One of the reasons I love working for a Colorado senator is that Colorado has had some of the earlier actions, real substantive policy, and has had a huge amount of progress in reducing climate change in a way that's created a lot of growth and economic opportunity across the state. So again, it's so discouraging because the actions we've taken have been so inadequate to date. But when you look at the ones that we have taken, that gives me heart and hope. And but it's a real challenge. There's no doubt about it.
If I'm curious what people think the answer to the question we debated is, and if it changes, if the election goes the way we don't want it to go in like, a couple of weeks. I think it might. That's my hot take.
So I think, and granted, I'm very biased because I want to do my, I'm starting my thesis right now as a junior, but my thesis right now is about climate change litigation. So when I read the judges' bios, I was like fangirling, but I think that and again, like our courts have kind of been packed by this administration, but I think just around the globe, climate litigation is something that's being used by young individuals. Like last year on September 23rd, 2019, Greta Thunberg and about 15 other youth climate activists filed a landmark complaint using the UNCRC, which is a legally binding international treaty that basically, and they filed it for the first time ever, basically saying that these G5 countries have violated the UNCRC and their right to health and their right to life through their contributions to climate change and their knowledge of climate change without combating it. So I think that even without the US, and again, I'm the optimist, but I think that without the US, and even if it doesn't go the way we want it to go, I have faith in a lot of the rest of the world, and I have faith in international courts.
I guess for me, at least, in terms of what happens in this election, it's really like all up in the air. Anything can happen. And I think that regardless of what happens, I think that one administration will make it easier to attack the problem. One administration will just make it a little bit tough. We'll make it tougher. We'll make it tougher than it already is. But I think that there's a lot of. I have like faith in the youth, at least in my generation, and in these in the groups that are at the forefront of this, because regardless of what happens, I think we have a system where we can keep, elected officials accountable. I just think it's a question of momentum and kind of having that one widespread movement where everybody's on the same page and like fighting disinformation and, like fighting divisiveness. So I think that regardless of the outcome, it is possible, but one outcome will be a lot easier, and we'll probably hit the time frame mark earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think there was like a hidden question in this question about like whether like the process we have in the US is a true democracy. And I think there was a team here that argued very persuasively that we need to actually strengthen democracy and start there, and that in itself would lead to the change that we want to see. And I think, I don't know, I think like that's a really complicated question. And I think, I know the debate that I judged, I know the Harvard team argued also persuasively against that it's hard to change the system from within the system. And I think to me, like, that's like one of the core messy parts is that, like, yes, we want to raise the voices that really matter and center those voices, but how do we do that in a system that has so successfully dampened them? And so if anyone has solutions to that, I'd love to hear.
Well, I don't have an answer to that, Survey, but I would be interested to hear, I think, from our debaters. I mean, I've heard a few rounds, for pro and con on the topic of subversion. And I think, like what Survey said, there's an inherent question. It's like, what does that mean? Like, how do you subvert in a way that is effective and brings about the results that you want? So I'm very curious to hear from your perspectives. I think we've heard some examples through the debates, but what does that invoke in your mind from the get-go? What does subverting the democratic process mean to you?
So I think in round two, Asher and I were on the neg, and we had an interesting debate against the team, Chicago, Devesh and Max, who their solution was basically to have like a federal reserve, but for climate scientists. I think like that kind of model is actually quite interesting, and it's not like I don't think it requires like a massive like abrogation of democracy. I think the idea is maybe just like give the EPA like a ton more power. And like have it make like those sorts of decisions independently. Like I think you still get the problems that like Ash and I were talking about, which are like, well, what happens if these things get rolled back? But I think like, for example, I think like there's a lot of stuff that the EPA did under the Obama administration in terms of like regulating like fossil fuel and coal plants. I think one of the reasons like I'm probably optimistic is because, and I think this is like a really interesting question. I'm not so sure that the need is to like subvert democracy to do all these things rather than just like level the playing field. I think the best example, of course, thank you so much, Jacob. I think you already left, but I think the best example is just like fossil fuel subsidies are something that I think is like very distortionary, and it's like it really changes like people's incentives on whether or not they want to like build fossil fuel companies or build green tech. And I think like the most damning thing is not just like I think it's like I think maybe you don't need to like go, the full way into like, banning like coal and everything like that. But I think like changing the starting points, the like the playing field that we're at right now, like massively subsidizing green like energy and like taking away fossil fuel subsidies seems to be like something that is getting more and more consensus. But yeah, I think like, I think the best case for subversion of democracy in this case is probably just like, having more scientists decide policy on their own, and like giving them the power to actually do that, which to me seems like a interesting idea.
Yeah, and just to add on to it too, because I know we often have similar views, and this is one of those cases. So I don't know how many of you ended up hearing our AF case, but like we talk about like bombing oil pipelines, and like I'm not really in favor of that. We think it makes the debate better, so we make that argument. But it's a bit much for me personally. What I do think though is that you can take like pretty radical actions and frame them as not subversive, right? Like, I'm trying to like pretty aggressive civil disobedience. Like most liberal theorists think that that's good for democracy, right? And like, and that to me seems like sort of a middle ground. That's a good way forward. That like you like in the civil rights movement, right? You like chain yourself to the White House fence or something, and you refuse to move even though it's illegal if you want to, right? And that sort of helps move the conversation forward without saying like I'm against democracy. You say there's something really wrong. We need to fix it.
Yeah, I think, off of that, so the way democracy works is kind of like at least the way it works in the Western framework is that like any attack against it is always, seen as negative in terms of like, the more overall purview. But I think that like subversion is more so just like a term. It's just a word essentially, not the actual actions. I think that there are things that we can do, like Asher was saying, like civil disobedience and having protests and movements and like engaging in things like movement lawyering, practices and all. That these are ways that we could, subvert it without saying it. So I think it's a question of go ahead and doing it without saying that we're subverting it, in order to have like more public support and in order to like continue momentum, which I think is like intrinsic to any movement for change.
Great, and I hate to cut this off, but we are over time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I wish we could like talk about this for like another like several hours because it's really fascinating and it's so encouraging to just see like so many young people like talking about these issues so intelligently and so thoughtfully, and that like gives me a lot of hope. And yeah, so thank you so much for participating. Thank you to the judges. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. As I said, if this conversation will continue in November during the Global Sustainability Film Awards. That week, there'll be panels and discussions that I hope will further bear out this issue. And so thank you all again so much. And yeah, I hope you